Hi there. My name is Evelyn Castillo-Bach, Executive Director of Balanced Justice Network. Today I'm going to begin by reading excerpts of an article published in the Miami Herald based on an excellent deep dive investigation. Thanks to the investigations of the Miami Herald team, we know what we know now about what happened in this terrible boat crash. The title of the piece was How Investigators and Prosecutors Bungled Probe into Boat Crash That Killed a Teen Girl. The clues that alcohol was a factor in a catastrophic boat crash that drowned one teen and permanently disabled another emerged immediately. The captain, a well-connected Doral real estate broker, admitted to drinking that day. The severely injured girl had a blood alcohol level of nearly twice the legal limit. And investigators the next day found 61 empty booze bottles and cans on the boat, which had been carrying 12 underage girls. Yet this was a day trip. It was a birthday celebration. The father, the captain of the ship, of the boat, is the father of the girl turning 18. She invited her girlfriends. Wonderful Sunday afternoon. It's Labor Day weekend in September 2022. Yes, this accident, this wreck that killed a teenage girl and seriously disabled another happened in 2022, but it's taken a while to find out what really happened. But continuing to read. It took less than 7 hours for investigators to rule out alcohol as a factor. Miami-Dade County's top prosecutor, State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, and the man who runs the state agency charged with keeping boaters safe, Rodney Barreto, have declined to be interviewed. In public statements, they have praised their teams for meticulously reviewing every aspect of the case and gone out of their way to underscore that alcohol was not a factor in this tragedy. So what the Miami Herald is saying here is that based on their reporting, both the top prosecutor of Miami-Dade, which is the state attorney, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, and the gentleman in charge of investigating accidents that happen in the water, he's the head of an organization called the FWC, which is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, okay? And his name is Rodney Barreta, if I have his name correctly. Yes, Rodney Barreta. Continuing with the article, Miami Herald says that they made this, so the Miami Herald article is pointing out that the state attorney's office and the head of the FWC had determined within 8 hours that, hey, alcohol was not involved. But the article goes on to say that they can't know that. In other words, they can't know that there was no alcohol involved because their investigators failed to give the boat captain, George Pino, a sobriety test. It was not a decision made alone by an investigator on the bay that night. This is important. This wasn't just some rogue investigator out there in Biscayne Bay, deciding, oh, no, there's no alcohol involved here. This is the done deal, let's go. No. The article goes on to say, he, meaning the lead investigator, was in touch with his boss on land and with Fernandez-Rundle's office, which had the power to ask a judge to compel a sobriety test, but did not. Okay, so they had the power to do this, but this did not happen. So the Miami Herald obtained public records under the Florida Public Records Law. And it was through those records that the Miami Herald says it revealed, and I quote, a bungled investigation and a state attorney who resisted more serious charges despite mounting evidence that alcohol was a factor in the tragedy. Those are not my words. That's not my emphasis. I am quoting directly from the Miami Herald. Okay? After 2 years of investigation, what they're saying is that all the records that they have acquired, based on all the records that they have, they say those records obtained under Florida's public records law reveal a bungled investigation and a state attorney who resisted more serious charges despite mounting evidence that alcohol was a factor in the tragedy. I consider that to be a very serious assertion. This article describes in great detail all the different investigators that were involved. There were a total of 5 investigators as I read the piece. All of them have body cameras. When Miami Herald reporters were doing their investigation, they asked to see those body cameras because they wanted to hear what statements were made, who did the investigators interview, because remember, there were a lot of other boats and people who saw what happened here. This does not happen in the dark. It happened at 6:37 on a Sunday, beautiful Sunday, still daylight out, people having a good time. It was Labor Day weekend. So the Miami Herald, they wanted to see those body cameras. It turns out that the footage that was on those cameras got deleted by accident. According to the article, these officers did not give these recordings a correct designation, and because they didn't give it a correct certain designation, they got deleted instead of being kept. Okay, that's another one of those things that I guess happens sometimes, right? The article goes on to say that what the Miami Herald did was they actually interviewed people that were in their boats who witnessed the accident. And it turns out that some of those people actually claimed to have spoken to some of the investigators. Others said that they had never been spoken to by the investigators. But based on those interviews that the Miami Herald did, they wrote an article in which they showed that their findings were that there were people who had witnessed what happened, and that it did not coincide with what the captain of this boat said had happened, that there were discrepancies. Very serious situation, very serious situation. The article goes on to say that one of the girls, well, before I go on to that, the article continues to say that the next day brought a literal pile of evidence of alcohol involvement, because remember, the boat was capsized, so they had to turn it over. So they did that the next day. So now they could see all this evidence that they had, all this cans of booze. But the FWC and the prosecutors withheld that information for the public for months. This is really serious. The Miami Herald is saying that the day after this accident, when they saw what was on this boat, they realized that alcohol was involved, but they didn't tell the public, and they didn't tell the families of those girls. The article says the day after the crash, Labor Day 2022, FWC investigators pulled Pino's boat from the bay and found 61 empty alcohol bottles and cans, including Coronas, Truly Hard Seltzers, and Bud Lights. They also found an empty bottle of La Marca Prosecco and a half-drunk bottle of Chambord raspberry liqueur. One of the girls on the boat months later would tell investigators the boat was stocked with alcohol drinks when the group set out for the ocean reef of Elliott Keys that day. And the 17-year-old girl who was so seriously injured said that she saw George Pino, the captain of the ship, the father of the birthday girl, drinking that day. So initially, what happened was that the state attorney herself, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, according to this article, had determined that only misdemeanor charges would be appropriate here. And according to the article, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle resisted raising the charges to a felony, and that according to the article, there was some tension between her and one of her prosecutors who did want to press for felony charges. Today, Mr. Pino, the gentleman who was the captain of that ship, today he's facing very serious charges because at the end of the day, now the state attorney's office has actually charged him with some very serious felonies that could result in decades in prison. So this issue, this investigation by the Miami Herald not only uncovered the truth about, or more truths, let's put it that way, of what occurred that day, more truths about what occurred that day, but it also exposed this close relationship between the head of the FWC and the state attorney herself. I'm actually kind of surprised that the state attorney herself would personally get involved on Labor Day weekend on a Sunday discussing this case with the head of FWC. I mean, you have investigators there that presumably they know what to do, they know how to proceed. Obviously, the investigators were in touch with their boss, and their boss was in touch with Catherine Fernandez-Rundle herself, based on what the Miami Herald is reporting here. And I find that rather interesting. It does bring up the whole issue of course, prosecutors have the power and the authority to decide who to prosecute, when to prosecute, what to prosecute them with, if they're going to prosecute them at all. I mean, that is all the prerogative of the prosecutor. Of course, in a case like this, where so many things seem to go sideways, the body camera footage accidentally gets deleted because it was labeled incorrectly. Witnesses aren't interviewed that should be interviewed, or some interviews are not apparently recorded. Some statements apparently are never reported. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Then in the middle of that, you have Catherine Fernandez-Rundle playing an active role in this. It really makes you think, makes you wonder, makes you question. What's the ethical protocol in this office? How do they decide? I mean, these situations are not easy. I'm not going to try to pretend they are easy. They're complicated situations, especially if you maybe know some of these people socially or politically or whatever. I get that part. But it does raise some questions about, are we showing certain type of preferential treatment or privilege for certain people because of who they are or what they know? I don't know. My name is Evelyn Castillo-Bach. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention. It's much appreciated. Be well.